Hey guys, welcome to the CFII oral here from fly8mikealpha.com from our CFII online checkride prep course. If you are going for your CFII, this is the video that you want to watch. Stephanie here is going for her CFII, and you guys are going to let us know in the comments below if you think she's ready for the checkride or not. This basically determines if I give you the endorsement for the checkride. So.
Okay, you better say yes.
Yeah, otherwise she's going to come hurt you. She's Chilean. Yeah, watch out. So we are going to go ahead and treat this as a II add-on, meaning this is not your initial CFI. You already are a CFI, a very experienced instructor, and we're going to be adding on the instrument rating to your CFI certificate, meaning we don't have to talk about the FOI stuff. We cover that in other videos online at fly8mikealpha.com. Links in the description below for those ones. And I should mention that I'm going to be using my computer here for the plan of action. That's where most of the questions and the formatting will come from here, and how I'll kind of hypothesize or form all those questions for you throughout this. This is based on the CFI PTS. We have made some adaptations here because we still are on the PTS as of 2024 here in January, but very soon here we're going to be moving over to the ACS. So a lot of the questions, a lot of the topics that we cover here are going to be phrased in that scenario-based SBT training model that's going to be ultimately what we're going to see here when the CFI PTS becomes the ACS, or the CFII PTS becomes the ACS. So this video will satisfy both of those, in case you guys are wondering, as we make those leaps and bounds into the future that the FAA promised us 8 years ago. Anyways, and we're going to jump right into the heart of the meat of this. You know, 3 possible outcomes, where the bathroom's at, all that good stuff that they would talk about on a check ride. Let's get right into the nitty-gritty details so you guys can give her a yay or nay on the going for the check ride next week. So, anyways, for starters, let's jump right into talking about CRM, SRM, ADM, all right? Mm-hmm. And what I'm really curious about is how are you going to incorporate ADM, or aeronautical decision-making, into your instrument instruction? Mm-hmm.
Yep, so for instruction, obviously, we're going to use a syllabus, mm-hmm. and in this case, instrument syllabus with our students. And
whose syllabus, though?
Flight Mike Alpha.
the Flight Mike Alpha instrument syllabus, of course.
And so we have different models, systematic approaches we use to cover those topics, such as the 3 Ps, or the decide model, that will allow us to cover ADM.
Awesome. Cool. Very good. And so ultimately what you're telling me, what it sounds like, is through the syllabus, you're going to have the 3P model, the decide model, incorporated into multiple lessons to try to build that aeronautical decision-making in the student throughout the process of their instrument training. That's exactly what you're telling me. And I'm just rephrasing it. That's totally what a lot of DPs do.
And to mention that it's very important as a single pilot flying instrument. It's very important to know how to manage everything as a single pilot. And so SRM becomes a very critical portion of that instrument instruction.
Sure. Talking a little bit about the decide model here, how would you teach your student to incorporate that into on-the-fly changes? Or how would that look, actually applying that? How would you teach them to use that in flight?
Well, it depends on what scenario you want to use, what phase of flight you're in. There's some phases of flight that are more critical, less forgiving than others. And basically, the premise of it is identify a situation or a challenge and decide what you're going to do, what action you're going to take to remedy that, and stick to that action, make it happen, and don't hesitate, basically, and then evaluate if that was the right course of action. So it's just making a decision and sticking to it. Don't second guess yourself. We've trained a lot for situations, and typically your first instinct would be the right one, and then just decide whether that's the right course of action, and that's how we learn too.
Sure. What would this look like? Say I'm flying along on an IFR flight plan, and I'm kind of in and out of the clouds, and I notice perhaps on my radar, or maybe I notice visually, a big buildup in front of me, like a thunderstorm. So how would that? What does each step look like in that particular case? And if I see a thunderstorm or a buildup, say 20 miles ahead on my course.
Right. So you just identify the problem first of all, or the challenge. Identify what your
So I detected Big thunderstorm, bad.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then go over your options.
Okay.
And
so I would estimate what I would want to do then at that stage. Cool.
Yeah.
What could be some options?
Options would be turn around. Options would be fly through it. Options would be divert. Not that all those options are the right options, but
sure.
Identify all your possible options and then realize, and identify what the outcomes will be if you take that course of action, and then just decide which is the safest, best course of action to take and stick to it.
Yeah, so something like asking ATC for 10 degrees left.
Sure. I mean, if you're flying IFR, want to communicate with ATC.
Could we just, if we saw a thunderstorm up ahead and we're on an IFR flight plan, can we just go ahead and spin around 180? Or
no, you have to contact ATC and let them know.
Can we offset 10 degrees?
No, not without permission from ATC. Yeah.
What would that sound like? If we're flying along under IFR and you're flying the famous red and white 170 Cessna 2962 Delta. So you're flying along in your 170 and I'm Anchorage Center. And so what does it sound like?
Basically, I would say Anchorage Center, Cessna 2962 Delta, detect thunderstorm up ahead, request whatever direction you want to take. You could say request 20 degrees left, or you could request a heading 210, or you could request a 180 turnaround heading, depending on what direction you're flying.
Sure, yeah, depending on how bad the situation is up ahead. If you want to turn around and go back 180, or if you want just deviations left to right, of course. Cheat code here that, I always used to request 10 degrees left, 20 degrees right for a buildup, for a thunderstorm. So Anchorage Center, Cessna 2960 Delta, request 20 left for a buildup, 10 degrees right for a buildup. And then, they come back and they say approved as requested, but my cheat code is request deviations right of course. And if they come back with approved as requested, 0 to 90 degrees, because sometimes you'd ask for 10 right or 10 left, and you go, and you would change the heading bug, and you turn to that heading, and you go, crap.
Maybe that's not enough.
That's not enough. Then you got to call them back. And
yeah.
If you're calling them for a deviation for bad weather, guess who else is calling them? Everybody and their mother is saying, hey, I need a deviation. I need a deviation. We all need deviations. So because the frequency is so busy and you perhaps want a little bit more leeway, especially with the altitudes we fly in general aviation, there's such oddball altitude. Nobody really flies IFR at 8,000 or 9,000 feet a lot. I mean, most of the IFR traffic is in the flight levels. So we do get a lot of width, a lot of berth sometimes with what we want. Anyways, very good on that. Big thing that the FAA cares about here is CFIT. So first, tell me what is CFIT?
Controlled flight into terrain.
Okay, give me an example of what that would be.
It could be you're in the clouds and you're following a heading or, something that was assigned to you by ATC, and you're running into terrain. Oh, and you go splat. So
that's a bad heading. We call that a bad heading or a bad vector. That's the definition of a bad vector.
And after all, they're humans. So, I mean, it's, a big mistake, but it could happen.
Sure, it could. Yeah, and so that could be CFIT. So how are you going to teach your students, what are you going to do throughout this whole process of training somebody from, a fairly new private pilot to an instrument-rated pilot, throughout the whole instrument rating process? What are you going to do to teach them to avoid CFIT?
It's all about situational awareness and being aware of what they say, every aspect of flight, which is very generalized terms, meaning terrain, weather, what your options are, what airports are there in your surroundings, in your route of flight, but mostly really for IFR flying, terrain, and what sort of hazardous terrain are you going to be flying close to in your route of flight. And also if you file a flight plan and you're looking at it prior to your flight, but you get assigned something completely different, just being aware of what those changes mean.
What kind of tools in the cockpit do we have to help us with CFIT?
Charts. I mean, not that I've flown with paper charts very much, but there's always those. I fly with, obviously my GPS 430 Garmin.
Okay. So the 430 has a terrain map in there.
They have the terrain map for situational awareness, and also with your iPad, which also has terrain awareness.
Yeah. If you pay for it. Yeah, I mean, or if you're cheap,
if you
like
pay
me,
for the
then,
IFR plan,
then you don't get those those annoying alerts that say terrain. Guess what? You actually, if you just don't pay for it, it never makes that noise. It's great. Like you don't have to pay to make
peace
it go
of mind.
away. Yeah, you can just fly along all day long, mowing the trees down, and and you land with some leaves in the gear, and you wonder why, and everything's fine. And you saved $79 a year, or you pay the $79 a year because you don't want to die.
I think it's $99 now.
Oh man, the price of living just keeps going up, guys.
Inflation.
Yep, death sounds cheaper and cheaper by the day. Anyways, could you go ahead and I want you to think about the PAVE model. So talking about risk management. I want you to think about a scenario or build me a scenario that you could apply the PAVE model to with your student. So you could essentially show me how you would teach your student to apply the PAVE model in some sort of like ground lesson.
Sure. So I would just come up with a scenario, and for the sake of coming up with one right off the bat, say you're flying for a 135, a company, and your chief pilot wants to fly them to a meeting they have the next morning somewhere that's maybe 100 miles away. And they have to make this meeting at a certain time, and you've never flown together before, but you want to really impress them. And maybe you went out with somebody the night prior, and maybe you stayed up a little late.
You've never done that the night before flying, though. I mean,
pilots don't drink.
No, pilots, and they're celibate too, right? Yeah, I mean, totally. Yeah, that's all pilots. I mean, as far as I know.
That would be a scenario where maybe that's the situation as far as what's motivating you for the flight. And then there's weather you have to check.Maybe you have marginal VFR weather that next morning. So yeah, that would be a scenario, and I would ask my student.
So what does, I guess, walk me through the PAVE checklist there in that scenario.
Sure. So PAVE is, let me see if I can remember, pilot, airplane, environment, which starts with a V apparently, and external pressures. So pilot, first you're checking are you as a pilot able to make the flight safely? Are you checking that I'm safe checklist, where are you safe to fly with all those factors.
So illness, no. Medication, whatever you're doing the night before might qualify, maybe not.
Self-medicated.
Self-medication. What are some of the others?
How much sleep you got, if you've eaten, trying to remember all of them. Alcohol, and again, external pressures. So checking that all those things meet the criteria for a safe flight. Making sure that you're not...
Are there any external pressures in this scenario that you gave me?
Yeah, so that's at the end. So we're still on pilot. Okay. Airplane is the airplane legal to fly? Are all your in an IFR scenario? Are all your charts up to date? Is your 430 database up to date? Is everything functioning? Do you have all the required equipment for IFR flight? So things like that. Environment is weather. Is this weather meeting your minimums, your personal minimums? Is it is everything with the weather legal as far as IFR flight, according to the approaches that you're going to choose? Do you need an alternate? All that kind of stuff. And then external pressures, which in this case, you want to impress somebody, and it's an important thing for your career, or so you think so at the time. Yeah. And is that the main motivator for your flight? Is that making you push your limits or your personal minimums to somewhere that's not comfortable for you, maybe? Something
tells me you didn't just make up this scenario. It seems a little too familiar. Anyways.
Maybe I've experienced it.
So, let's talk about task management then. So managing those tasks. How would you teach your student to minimize distractions from flying the airplane? So, what are they going to do in the cockpit when they're flying under IFR to manage their task, manage all the tasks, and minimize distractions?
Sure. So, having as a single pilot resource management, part of what that means is having everything organized in the cockpit so that you're not creating distractions for yourself that could be avoided. So things that distract me a lot, like trying to get my water bottle from the back seat, or trying to reach for, I don't know, something as simple as a pen, or, you know, putting your head down while you're flying in the clouds. So organizing your cockpit so that you have everything accessible before the flight even begins would be a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be appropriate to, when your student's on an ILS approach, say, and you're training them, to ask them to reach in the back seat and grab a water bottle for you?
Well, you can create distractions in the cockpit for your student, which would be beneficial because...
For them to see how well that goes or doesn't.
Yeah, or to just even see what decisions they make if they are going to...
Perhaps they just refuse to get the water bottle would be the best case scenario.
Which is what they should do.
Yeah.
But if they're actually going to drop everything and listen to me, who's a passenger, then you want to create that awareness with your student.
Sure. No, that sounds very good. How would you teach your student to use their checklists and flows in a manner that would not increase their workload during flight?
Yeah, so, you know, one thing is, don't be using your checklist for the first time when you're flying an IMC for the first time ever. Or, you know, just make sure you're used to that flow that you're using. Don't try new things. I mean, you've trained a lot for this rating, and don't be doing things for the first time when you're in actual IMC. Trying to get that flow where it becomes automatic so that when you're actually flying the airplane, you're focused on flying the airplane, on all of the, you know, whatever you need to be focusing on at the time, the approach, the route, and not being concerned with, oh, am I checking this item on the list and staring at your list, or fixating on one instrument, or, you know, all those things that fixation really is a big distraction. So having that flow be automatic.
Sure. How would you teach that? I mean, is that just done in the air? Is it done on the ground? Like,
no, you do a lot of chair flying. So you would sit in the airplane on the ground, and you're not paying money for the rental or for your fuel. And
flight school owner says, shucks, darn it.
And do what you can to really memorize those checklists and making sure that all the items make sense, that you're not finding an item that you've never seen before, you're wondering, what is that?
What I love when students read the checklist items and they read them and they have no idea what they're reading or what they're checking and why they're checking it and how that system even works in the first place. So if there is any item on that checklist, like checking a standby battery, and you're flipping it and holding a switch on your G1000, you don't really know what that's doing, you're probably not ready for your CFII check ride. So, yeah, don't just tell me, oh, we're checking the standby battery. Well, how are we checking it? What's happening when we flip the switch? There's a little fairy inside there that, like, runs along, checks the battery, and he's like, nope, good. And then the green light comes on. But be able to understand the systems, ultimately, that you are checking and doing on those checklists. Like you said, you know, and chair flying is a great way to do that. So I like that. How would you define essay? Like, we always like to say essay is so important. Essay, hombre, hecha. So how would you define situational awareness for your student when you're teaching them about this super important essay?
Yeah, so situational awareness is really what it says, is just being as aware as possible of your situation, of your surrounding. Again, what is some of the terrain that you're going to be passing by that you should be aware of? What are the threats?
Is everyone watching this video right now aware that there's a Pomeranian right here on the floor?
He's very distracting, actually. So don't bring your dog to your CFII check ride.
Oh, man. That's a good tip. Pro tip right there.
Yeah, for sure, having a awareness of your surrounding, what the weather is doing, what the forecast said, what airports you have that could be alternates that maybe you didn't list as an alternate, but what are your options in case anything unexpected happens, which usually, and especially here in Alaska, weather unexpectedly changes. The forecast isn't always correct, you know, or maybe something with the airplane happens. Maybe you lost fuel, or you have less fuel than you anticipated. All those kinds of things. Being aware of what your fuel options are at every moment of the flight.
I think we could probably agree that a big detriment to situational awareness, to SA, is fixation on one thing, and you start to lose track of what's going on in other areas. How would you teach your student to detect and avoid fixation?
Well, I might purposely distract them with something where they're fixated. You might purposely, I don't know, something's wrong with the door latch and your door's open. And this happened to me once where my door was open the entire flight. And I fixated so much on that I didn't really keep track of that I was running on one tank and I didn't switch tanks and I almost ran it dry in the air. So just little things like that, maybe purposely creating scenarios for a student to distract them and make them fixate. And then also just reminding them like, hey, tell me what your scan is right now. What are you looking at right now? What are you keeping track of in the plane? Are you, looking at all of that information that you have in front of you? Yeah.
You know what I love right now is everyone at home is thinking, why didn't you just land and close the door, Stephanie?
The latch broke.
Yeah. And what they also don't realize is from where you took off to where you landed, there's no airports for 100 miles.
That's true. There wasn't.
Yeah. And if the tide's up, there's no beach to land on. So, yeah.
Thanks for putting that in context.
Welcome to the lesson. Not always as easy as you might think. Now, you don't have an autopilot on this airplane, and typically the examiner won't ask you too many autopilot questions if you don't have one on your aircraft. But I'm not nice, so I'm going to ask some autopilot questions. So, when would be a great time to use autopilot? Like anytime?
No, I mean, you're right. I don't have autopilot, so I don't have a ton of experience with it. But I would say during cruise flight, when you're, level at an altitude. I mean, even when you're holding an altitude and heading, and when you're having to, change that altitude or heading, an autopilot would be an easy way to just program it to go where you want it to go while you're focused on other things.
It could reduce our task load to some
Correct,
extent.
yeah.
We could engage the autopilot and then complete a checklist. Is it best to just run with the autopilot on all the time?
A lot of people do, and it works great for them. But just being aware of the limitations and being and double checking your autopilot, not just blindly relying on it and then taking a nap.
Sure. Do you think that if you have a student and you have them use the autopilot, say 80-90% during their training, and then you have one that only uses the autopilot 10 or 20%, which one do you think would be better at flying the airplane if the autopilot broke?
The one that didn't rely on the autopilot, obviously.
Sure. So maybe we need to teach them how to use it, all its failure modes, and when it's appropriate to use it. I'll give you an example here. Say we are about to intercept the localizer. We're outside the final approach fix, and ATC has given us a heading to join the final approach course. And we're about to intercept the localizer, and the autopilot should turn onto course, but instead it's just taking us right through it. So would this be a good time to try to reprogram the autopilot and keep it engaged and try to get it to re-intercept the localizer course? Or what should we do in this case?
I would disengage the autopilot altogether and hand fly it at that point.
Perfect, yeah. So I guess it's kind of like, hey, the autopilot helps reduce workload until the workload increases a whole lot, and then sometimes you can actually reduce workload also by disconnecting the autopilot.
Or if you're in a critical phase of flight or doing an approach and the autopilot's failing and you're trying to troubleshoot the autopilot and you're no longer paying attention to what's happening. So it could create a big distraction.
If you got into a student brought you an airplane and it had an autopilot, so you get into this airplane, you're going to train them for their instrument rating, it's autopilot equipped, where would you look to learn about how to work that autopilot?
The manual.
Where do we find the manual? What do we call it? Not just the manual.
FMS?
Yes, an FMS.
Which should be in the airplane.
Yes, legally it should be in the aircraft, a flight manual supplement, not the flight management system like your Garmin 430, but the flight manual supplement that's oftentimes required to be in the aircraft, pretty much just as much as the POH is required to be in there and anything else, per the STC that was installed. So, cool, very good. Let's see here. You had already mentioned, some use of distractions there and how you might do some of that. We get to skip all of Area of Operation 1, all the FOI boring stuff. And we can jump right into Area of Operation 2, which is super fun. And the first thing we want to talk about is the Pitot-static system. So tell me, how does this instrument right here work?
That one uses the pitot tube and the static ports.
Okay. And I know your aircraft is equipped with a G5 right here. Is that a different pitot tube and different static port, or?
Same one.
Same one. Yep. Same. Exactly. And so basically, if one stops working, the other one's not going to work too well either. How does the altimeter work?
The altimeter works with the static port, and it's just measuring the difference in pressure as you're climbing and descending.
Okay. And how about the VSI?
The VSI works similarly, measuring the difference in pressure, but it has a calibrated leak, so it shows a momentary climb or descent, and then once you're level, it goes back to 0, and it does have a little bit of a delay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you wanted to teach your student about what does it look like, what are the inner workings of all this, like we spin this little knob here and adjust this number inside this window. What's this window called?
Kollsman window.
Yep. Cool. Did you ever meet him?
Mr. Kollsman.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's the guy's name. But anyways, if you wanted to show me a diagram of like the inner workings of these instruments, where could we look and find that?
Well, the
Google, TikTok, Instagram. The book.
Drawing a blank. The airplane flying handbook, or the one.
Instrument. Is this an instrument checkride?
The instrument flying handbook.
The instrument flying handbook.
One of those handbooks.
Yeah. That sounds probably like a good one to look inside of there. Cool. So you mentioned all these 3 are Pitot-static. Any others on here that run off the Pitot-static system?
No.
What happens if I pull this little red knob here labeled alternate static air?
That's your obviously alternate static port, which if your static port, which is usually located on the side of the plane, if that gets blocked for any reason, you could pull that knob and it opens your alternate static port, which gets pressure readings from inside the airplane. Cool.
Now, some airplanes seem to have, by the way, this is an airplane. Some airplanes seem to have the static port right there. Some airplanes have the static port back here and here. What's the advantage of having a static port on both sides of the aircraft versus just one?
You have 2 instead of 1, so...
2, I mean, more is better, And that's what Stephanie said when she said, hey, we have 1 dog, and we should get another, and yeah.
That's right. And we should have 3. So if one gets blocked...
Is this better? Yeah. Totally.
So if one gets blocked, you have the other one.
So if one gets blocked, we have the other one. What would happen if I slipped the airplane with 1 static port versus if I slipped it with 2 static ports?
Right. So you can get a more accurate reading.
Sure. If we're flying in any sort of slip, that sounds good. Now, if I plug the static port and I pull that alternate static source, what's it going to do to these instruments? Are they all going to start working again? Tangle, do you have any guesses on that, buddy? You have no idea.
He's uncomfortable right now.
Yeah, he's kind of camera shy. Yeah.
The alternate static port would read differently. The pressure inside the airplane is a little bit lower than what you would read from the outside. What
would happen to our VSI here if I pulled the alternate static source?
It would show a momentary climb.
How about the altimeter?
Same.
Momentary climb?
Or it would show a climb.
So it would just keep climbing?
No. It would show... It would show
higher altitude,
a higher altitude
than we were actually at. How about the VS or the ASI, the airspeed indicator?
Yep, that would also read faster than actual.
Okay, so we might want to be aware that we need to actually fly a faster indicated airspeed and cruise at a higher indicated altitude to be safe and avoid obstacles and stuff. The altimeter, when we're on the ground, is there any allowable error, like between field elevation and what it reads when we set the proper altimeter setting?
Yeah, it should be within 75 feet of field elevation.
And lastly, how about the VSI? Would that is that acceptable to be at 0 or -1, +2?
It could read something other than 0, but if it does, you have to account for that during flight. And say it reads 100 foot per minute climb, you have to just assume that that's 0.
Okay. Now, on the attitude indicator here, does that work off the Pitot-static system at all?
No.
Okay, how does that work?
That's working off the vacuum pump, the vacuum instruments.
Okay. What else is vacuum driven here?
Well, that would be your DG.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. And the vacuum pump, you said it's electronic, or how does it work?
Typically, it's an engine-driven.
Okay, so when the engine's on, it's running.
Mm-hmm.
How do we verify that we have suction or vacuum?
We have a little suction gauge.
The one that's covered up by the yoke?
Which I can never find in this chart.
Can you move the yoke, maybe? Cool, so that would tell us there. How about, what do these little lights up here say?
Well, those are enunciations. So things that you need to check or that are malfunctioning.
Yeah, so what is like L, vac, and R?
Oh, there's 2 vacuum pumps.
Okay, so it looks like both the left and the right are what right now?
Not working.
Because the engine's off.
Okay. Yeah. That would make sense.
That would make a lot of sense, right? So what would be some other clues besides low suction or these lights that the attitude indicator is not getting suction?
So the attitude, as you can see, there is a little flag.
Okay, a little gyro flag there. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. How do we check these instruments when we're taxing out?
Well, we want to make sure that as far as the attitude indicator is erect and it's not turning in a turn, not more than 5 degrees. It's doesn't have any red flags or X's or enunciations. We want to check all the instruments basically. We want to make sure, as we talked about, the altimeter being 75 feet within field elevation. The vertical speed indicator should be at 0 or account for the error. The turn coordinator, in a turn the ball would be opposite direction of turn, and the little airplane will show us a bank in the direction of turn. And what else?
And that you said for the attitude indicator, no more than
5 degrees.
Okay, a bank there. Cool. All right, no, that all sounds good to me. Is this a legal IFR panel? Is there anything missing here before we can go fly IFR?
Let's see.
Don't answer. We'll see if you guys are actually paying attention or not. Is this legal to go fly IFR with this panel? Look, I'll get my computer out of the way here for you. You've got all that stuff. You got a Garmin 750. It looks like a great panel. Is there anything missing? You guys let us know in the comments below. All right, the remaining 90 minutes of this video are online at fly8mikealpha.com. Link in the description below there. Thank you so much for watching this much, guys. If you want to help us out, a huge help is to like the video, subscribe, ring the bell there. Also, if you really want to help us out, what helps us make all this content available for free here on YouTube is when you sign up for our courses and recommend our courses to your friends online at fly8mikealpha.com, whether it's private, instrument, commercial, CFI, tailwheel, seaplane, any of this stuff, ski flying, all sorts of courses, over 28 courses online on the website there. The full, of course, instrument checkride prep course, the instrument ground school, written prep course, and everything you need for your double I as well if you're working on your CFI or CFII. Any questions on anything you saw here so far, guys, leave it in the comments below. We'd be more than happy to help you out and answer any of those questions. If you have further questions or you want to get super prepared for those check rides coming up, check out the links in the description below to Fly 8 Mike Alpha, and those courses guarantee that you will pass your oral exams and your check rides when you complete those. As always, if you cannot fly every day, fly8mikealpha.com. We'll see you guys in the next one.